Hi, Victor. I know many projects also fail because of organizational issues. Does that also happen with AI projects?
AI doesn't build itself. I guess that would be a scary outcome for most people if AI was just only building itself, because then obviously you get a runaway thing and you end up with the scary Terminator or singularity or whatever you want to call it. But yeah, people being in the mix, as we talked about, bias and data being the problem, introduces a lot of other issues generally. An organization is really as good as its people and processes, and AI is really as good as those things plus the data. And of course, you need to have organizational and team alignment. So you kind of have to have a goal or an outcome and build some strategies to reach those goals. I feel like I'm almost teaching a little mini business class right now, but like realistically, one of the big things that you want to do is ensure that you have a desired outcome, and then everybody who's part of that project understands how their contribution actually builds to that desired outcome. So even if you're the intern who's labeling data at this organization, you should know that the broader goal of labeling this data is that you want to get to a place where you're going to predict some outcome and it's going to yield some return on investment. You may be too young or too inexperienced at this point to really understand deeply what all that means, but you kind of all need to align. Generally, when there is a lack of alignment, you also often have a lack of, let's say, standards or operating procedures or processes, right? So in an organization where it's very laissez-faire all over the place, you may let things slip culturally. It might just happen because leadership isn't quite the way it should be or hasn't thought through all the ramifications of what could happen. And in the world of these sort of like large undertaking projects, especially in AI, there is 5 factors where you really need to understand what you're doing in order to get to a good outcome. And they really are, like we touched a little bit upon the first one, where you need an objective. That's obviously the first factor. Like, why are you building an AI project and an AI model and doing all this work if you don't have a clear articulated objective? So just generally, you need to go, I want to build an AI model to do this kind of thing with this kind of input and this kind of output. The output is going to be a prediction, yes or no, and the input is like all these signals of whatever the context is. The reason that I want that is for whatever, we're trying to gain more market share, let's say, right? So now you have a clear articulated objective. Then you're going to want to source and gather as much data about the problem. We've talked about this a lot. So really look to gather as much of the descriptive data and transactional data as you can for this, and really look to make sure that all of that data is usable together, because we talked about the issues with siloed data and siloed teams. So you want to be able to access all of that data. The third factor of a successful AI model and project is that your AI really needs to be explainable. As an executive, they don't want to have a black box kind of just like throw something in and out comes some magical answer. That sounds great, except that if you can't explain it, there are authorities and there are rules and laws that could be governing the decision that's being made. And your executives and your whoever down the line team that uses this is going to need to be able to have proof that the AI model did what it was supposed to do with the data that it would have done, and made a decision, or you made the decision based on that model in a similar manner that a person would have made it, because we're all very mistrusting of systems and we want to build trust in those, of course, right? Once you get to the fourth factor, once you get to an AI model that's trained and ready and validated, you really don't want to be retraining unless there's a valid reason. You might have a model or a system that is constantly retraining, like a recommendation engine, let's say, and that's fine. There's a valid reason to retrain that. It's getting better all the time, and you can prove that it's getting better because you're giving it new weights, really, to new embeddings and new weights to the models, which allows it to, churn through the data in a slightly different way. But just trying to retrain train the model at some point to beat some arbitrary metric, whatever that is that you were measuring on the best model at first, is kind of not going to work very well, because you want to be able to, again, explain everything and not introduce bias. So you want to keep that model static where possible. And then, as we mentioned, just like the project brief or just like the real objective, you want to define all the or all the inputs to this AI and all the outputs that you will get. And you want to have them very well defined and understood by people on the team. You want to get to that place just simply because if you don't understand all the stuff that's coming in, you're going to get as good of stuff coming out as you can give it. It's normal or common adage called garbage in, garbage out, right? What else? In an organization itself, if we're talking about the organization being the problem, other issues that we've seen or heard of is that there can be a lack of trust in the organization. And that this happens in kind of like slightly toxic environments where, especially if it's lacking trust between individuals, between leaders, within departments. Like, for example, you might have competing objectives from data science teams, IT, and IT security. All three of them kind of work in the world of systems and data and code and whatnot, but they have different mandates. And those mandates will necessarily take them in different paths. And if there is a lack of trust or a lack of belief between the teams or between the leaders of those teams, you often get like a nastiness between projects, and sometimes a really crappy way of like stopping projects by flexing the muscle of that group and saying, no, our thing hasn't been handled and we will not allow this to go forward. That's a really terrible thing to live in, and it happens in some organizations. And then like really the biggest thing, which is what we started with, is like top-down alignment, is understanding we have this goal, we have an outcome that we want to get to, and everybody is a cog in the wheel. So how do we all work to get to that place? Now, if you had a leader that was amazing and had everybody aligned, and you happen to lose that leader, lose that champion, that can also be a detriment to a project. But that's just generally across the board. That's not just necessarily an AI project, but really losing the champion to a big undertaking can hurt that undertaking generally, obviously. Yeah, so that sort of paints the picture as to how internal AI projects and just generally projects may not go the way that you expected them. And we examine them in sort of like two lenses, where data is the big problem versus the organization is the big problem. And I know many people don't want to ever blame the organization, but it happens. Like sometimes you get runaway groups and organizations, and you kind of have to rein those in. And that's not an easy thing. Data being the problem is often a little easier because it's an easier thing for you to handle and fix. So again, remember, for really successful projects in AI, people, process, and alignment. Those are the cultural and company or an organization things. And then data. Data is a huge, huge thing. And of course, if you still have some trouble or you want to leg up and make it slightly easier, the best way to go at it is to have a really strong platform so that you can just put some data points, observations, or whatever in, and you know that you're going to get the kind of results that you were expecting. We have such a platform called Apogee. However, it's not just an AI suite, it's AI and NLP, along with a bunch of conversational AI to help you deploy things in a no-code manner.